Welcome to another bar walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over bar area 3. This is section C8. This is going over two topics. First is remembering and understanding, recall and explain the types of budgets used by state and local governments, and then application, prepare journal entries to record budgets, and that would be original and final, of state and local governments. And just as we're jumping into this, I want to let you know that we're mainly focusing on the second one, the application one about the journal entries. We will talk a little bit about the types of budgets, but that is not extremely complicated, so that's why we're mainly focusing on the journal entries. Now, we're going to be doing all this the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. Again, that is a free 1-hour webinar that we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exams so you don't waste months or even years of your time failing exams. So make sure you check out that webinar, and that will be a great path to you learning more about becoming part of SuperfastCPA, where you can get access to a lot of great stuff. You can purchase the pro course, you can purchase our supplemental study materials, which are like our mini quizzes, our audio notes, our review notes, or you can get the total bundle, which includes everything, and something that is included currently in the pro course, but it will be switched to being a part of the supplemental study materials, is our beta walkthrough videos, which are these videos. So in today's video, we're going to be going over 5 questions for the YouTube version, but the beta walkthrough videos, if you become a part of SuperfastCPA, are something that usually has double the amount of YouTube questions, so you can get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding. So if you like this, again, make sure you check out SuperfastCPA by going to our webinar on SuperfastCPA.com. Now with all that said, let's dive into the questions for this video. All right, here we are at question 1. As I mentioned, we're mainly focusing on the journal entries around the budgets, but in this first question, we are going to learn a little bit about the different types of budgets when it comes to governmental accounting. So something I always like to point out is reading the last sentence of the question first. It's a very good habit, a very good practice, especially for exam day, because you have no idea what you're going to be seeing on the exam when you go into the exam. So reading the last sentence first very frequently will give you context for what you're dealing with. So let's do that here. Which of the following correctly describes the city's original and final budgets? Let's go up to the top. A city adopts a budget for its general fund at the beginning of the fiscal year. During the year, the city makes several legally authorized changes to the budget. So based on that, which of the following correctly describes the city's original and final budgets? So what are the options here? The original budget is the estimated revenues, the final budget is the appropriations, or is it that the original budget is the first complete appropriated budget, while the final budget is the original budget adjusted for legally authorized changes? Is it that the original budget is prepared using estimated amounts and the final budget replaces those amounts with actual revenues and expenditures? Or is it that the original budget applies to governmental funds while the final budget applies to government-wide financial statements? Now, if you don't know any of this, that's okay. We haven't really talked about it very much in previous videos. And again, we're learning about what the different types of budgets are. So if you haven't learned these before, this is a great question to use to learn about it. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to think through this, but otherwise, let's go ahead and go to the answer to start learning. All right, here we are. The answer is B. The original budget is the first complete appropriated budget, while the final budget is the original budget adjusted for all legally authorized changes. That basically gives the definitions right there, but let's go a little bit more into it. The original budget is the first complete budget formally adopted by the government. So it's what they originally did. The final budget is the original budget adjusted for legally authorized changes, such as supplemental appropriations and approved revisions to estimated revenues. So the final budget is basically, now that they've learned some things, now that some things have happened, they kind of finalize it with some legal changes, like maybe some extra appropriations or maybe revisions to the estimated revenues. The final budget is still a budget. It does not replace estimated amounts with actual results. So it's still a budget. It's not, the actual final numbers. It's just kind of a revised version of the original budget. The original budget is initially recorded in the budgetary accounts, and authorized changes made during the year cause those accounts to reflect the final budget. So again, original budget, what they originally put, final budget with some legal changes, what they end up with, but again, it's still the budget. Now, we learned a little bit about the types of budgets. Now, throughout the rest of this video, we're going to be mainly focusing on budgetary journal entries. So let's go ahead and go to question 2. All right, here we are at question 2. Which of the following journal entries should the county make to record the original budget? So a county adopts an original budget for its general fund that includes estimated revenues of $1,284,000 and appropriations of $1,139,000. So again, what's the journal entry to record the original budget? Now, if you have any idea how this works, then you might be able to read through these and kind of give it a good guess, or if you are somewhat familiar with this from work or something like that. But if you've never really seen this before, I don't think you're really going to have too much of a guess. Are we going to debit estimated revenues, or how much are we going to debit or credit the budgetary control for? Like, if you don't know, that's okay. We're using this question to start laying the foundation for these journal entries. So let's go ahead and look at the answer to start learning about this so that we can better understand the following questions. Okay, the answer is that you would debit estimated revenues control for the $1,284,000, you would credit appropriations control for the $1,139,000, and then you would credit budgetary control for $145,000. Again, if you've never really seen this before, you might not have really known how to do this at all. Let's go through this. The county records the original budget with the following entry, what we just talked about: a debit to estimated revenues, a credit to appropriations, and a credit to budgetary control. The estimated revenues is debited, while the appropriations control is credited. That's just something you need to know. You debit the estimated revenues, you credit the appropriations. The budgetary control is the $145,000 difference needed to balance the entry. So essentially, the budgetary control is the plug. It's the difference between the two. Because estimated revenues was greater than the appropriations, you have budgetary control filling in the rest that appropriations didn't fill, the difference between the estimated revenues and the appropriation control. Because estimated revenues exceed appropriations, like I just said, budgetary control is credited. A debit to budgetary control would be used if appropriations exceeded estimated revenues. And to be honest, that's what we're going to talk about in the next question. So let's go to question 3. All right, here we are at question 3. As I just said, this one's going to be pretty similar, but with appropriations being greater than estimated revenue. So let's go through this. Which of the following journal entries should they make for the original budget? The original budget is that they have estimated revenues of $2,376,000 and appropriations of $2,514,000. Now, based on what we learned in the previous question, I honestly think that you could do this question because it's very similar, and we just learned the rule in the previous question if you were paying attention. So I really think that you could pause this. You might not even have to pause it. You might already know the answer by looking at these. So pause the video, think through this, and when you're ready, come back, apply what we just learned, and then we'll look at the answer together. All right, here we are. The answer is C. You would debit estimated revenues control for the $2,376,000. You would debit budgetary control for $138,000. Notice that we're doing a debit there for the budgetary control, not a credit. And then you credit appropriations control for the full $2,514,000. Again, we just talked about this rule in the previous question. This was an application of it. Estimated revenues control is debited. Appropriations control is credited, like we just talked about. Because appropriations exceeded estimated revenues by $138,000, budgetary control must be debited to balance the entry. So again, the budgetary control is just a plug. It's just there to fill in whatever it needs to fill in. If appropriations is greater than the estimated revenues, then the budgetary control is going to be a debit alongside the estimated revenues. If the estimated revenues are greater than the appropriations, then the budgetary control is going to be a credit alongside the appropriations. So again, it's just a plug. The debit to budgetary control represents an expected budgetary deficit, meaning the town plans to use existing budgetary resources to cover part of its appropriations. So that's what that journal entry means. They're expecting to use some of their resources to be able to cover their appropriations because they're not expecting their estimated revenue to fully cover the appropriations. So with that, now let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 4. What amounts should the city record as estimated revenues and estimated other financing sources? Okay, so this is a little bit different than what we've talked about before, but along the same lines. A city's general fund budget includes the following estimated inflows: property taxes of $3,147,000, business licenses $218,000, fines $96,000, intergovernmental grant revenue $641,000, proceeds from a debt issuance $875,000, and transfer from another fund $264,000. So out of all these amounts, what is going to be the estimated revenues and what's going to be the estimated other financing sources? Now, we haven't really talked about this directly yet. We haven't talked about what is considered estimated revenue, what's considered estimated other financing source. Now, based on what you might have learned from some of the previous videos or from your review course, maybe you have an idea of what would be a revenue and what would be an other financing source. If not, that's okay. We're going to use this question to learn that. If you want, go ahead and pause the video to think through this, but if not, let's go ahead and go to the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is D. Estimated revenues would be $4,102,000, and estimated other financing sources would be $1,139,000. So let's go through this. Property taxes, licenses, fines, and intergovernmental grant revenue are classified as revenues. So you add $3,147,000 plus $218,000 plus $96,000 plus $641,000. That gives you $4,102,000. Debt proceeds and transfers into the fund are classified, or essentially interfund transfers are classified as other financing sources. So $875,000 plus $264,000 equals $1,139,000. The budgeted inflows would appear on the debit side of the budget entry as follows. You would debit estimated revenues control for the amount that we have, $4,102,000, and you would debit estimated other financing sources for $1,139,000. Debt proceeds and transfers are financial inflows, but they are not revenues. They must therefore be recorded separately as estimated other financing sources. And so you basically learned there what is going to be part of estimated revenues, what's going to be part of estimated other financing sources. Again, estimated revenues includes property taxes, licenses, fines, and intergovernmental revenue, not interfund transfers, but intergovernmental revenue. And then the other financing sources would be things like interfund, debt proceeds, things like that. All right, we learned a little bit more there. Now let's go to the next question. Okay, this one's a little bit more involved. We're at question 5. This is basically going to take a lot of what we learned throughout the other questions and try to have you apply it. So let's go through this, and I'm going to have you try it on your own. Which of the following journal entries should the county make to record the original budget? Let's go up to the top. A county adopts an original budget for its general fund containing the following amounts. Estimated revenues, $4,540,000. Estimated other financing sources, $895,000. Appropriations, $5,118,000. And estimated other financing uses, $144,000. So, based on everything we've learned so far in this video, I want you to give this a try. Try to pause the video and calculate it, figure it out yourself, think about the journal entry, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is B. You would debit estimated revenues control for $4,540,000 and estimated other financing sources for $895,000. And you would credit appropriations control for $5,118,000, estimated other financing uses for $144,000, and then you would credit budgetary control as the plug for $173,000. So let's go through this. This shouldn't have been too difficult, but it was, in a different format, so maybe you got a little bit confused. Estimated revenues and estimated other financing sources are debited. We learned about estimated revenues being debited, and it would make sense that the other financing sources would also be debited, while appropriations and estimated other financing uses are credited. Total estimated inflows exceed total budgeted outflows by $173,000, and you can see that by adding together the estimated revenues and estimated other financing sources, and then subtracting the other financing uses and the appropriations. And that gives you $173,000. So that gives us the plug, the budgetary control account. And then all we do is just do the journal entry as we've already talked about it. You debit estimated revenues and estimated other financing sources. You credit appropriations and estimated other financing uses. And then as we just talked about, the plug is the budgetary control, and it's a credit this time because, as we said, the total estimated inflows exceed total budgeted outflows. Because estimated inflows exceed budgeted outflows, budgetary control is credited for the difference, as we've talked about throughout this video. Estimated other financing uses, such as planned transfers to another fund, are included with appropriations when determining the budgetary surplus or deficit. Now, with that, we've learned a lot in just 5 questions about the budgetary journal entries and a little bit about, the original and the final budget. Now, before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperFast CPA process called pillar topics. Now, as a reminder, right before we get into the pillar topics, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions in your main review course to learn, you are going to see the same things pop up throughout the questions. You're going to see the same concepts, the same ideas, and you're going to know that something is important because you've seen it in like 2 or 3 or 4 questions. So you take a moment and in your own words, write out what you've learned, what the pillar topic is, so that as you're going, you are keeping track of the most important things you need to know. Now with that, let's go to the pillar topics for this video. Okay, here we are at the pillar topics. Let's just dive in. Again, this is essentially In your own words, a summary of what you learned. First, the original budget is the government's first complete adopted budget. The final budget is the original budget adjusted for all legally authorized changes. Now, we only talked about that in the first question. The rest of it was about the journal entries. Estimated revenues and estimated other financing sources are debited when recording a budget. Appropriations and estimated other financing uses are credited. Budgetary control is the amount needed to balance the budget entry. It is credited when estimated inflows exceed budgeted outflows, and debited when budgeted outflows exceed estimated inflows. Most commonly, you'll be seeing this, from what I have learned, you'll be seeing this as the difference between estimated revenues and appropriations. However, you may see estimated inflows and estimated outflows, but definitely make sure that you know that this journal entry with the estimated revenues and the estimated appropriations is going to be the most common thing you see a lot of the time. Finally, taxes, licenses, fines, and intergovernmental revenues are classified as revenues. So that's what's going to be part of the estimated revenue. Debt proceeds and transfers into a fund are other financing sources, while transfers out are other financing uses. Now, again, those were the pillar topics. Those are the main things that we kind of were supposed to pull out from the questions we learned from. Now, with that, that is the end of the YouTube version of this video. Again, we went over 5 questions and the pillar topics, but in a lot of the videos, there are double the amount of questions so that you can get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding if you become a part of SuperfastCPA. Currently, it's part of being a pro member, but that will eventually transition to being a part of the supplemental materials that we have. So it will be included with the audio notes, the mini quizzes, and things like that. So again, if you like this, make sure you check out becoming a part of SuperfastCPA. If I'm being honest, in this video, we're only doing 5 questions for YouTube and 5 questions for the member version because it's really straightforward and really simple. But again, a lot of times it is 10 questions for the member version. So I hope that you found that this was helpful. Thank you for watching or listening, and I will see you in the next one.